So, having been to the Newport Tower in 2017 and meeting these new friends, one who was pursuing new information on the idea that Henry Sinclair had built the Newport Tower, and the other who runs the Newport Tower Museum, believing that John Dee built the Newport Tower, and I'm being guided by Joshua to pursue both strands of information. At this time, they're each coming up with new information on the subject, which is fascinating that that's happening at all. And I'm going to lectures by this author that I've met at Masonic lodges as he details his research into the Sinclair story. And more it feels compelling. At the same time, I'm conferring with Jim Egan at the Newport Tower and learning more and more about his idea about John Dee having built it. I'm not going to go in the history of both these guys again, just because. Well, I'll say one thing about Sinclair. Sinclair would be considered to be, for those who believe Jesus had children, he would be a direct descendant of the royal line, according to some. And Rosslyn Chapel, which is in the Da Vinci Code, is an essential part of his family. In fact, his grandson builds Rosslyn Chapel. And the interesting thing about Rosslyn Chapel that tends to give support to the Sinclair story is that Rosslyn Chapel has built into the walls sculptures of things which represent the history of Scotland. Well, two of the sculptures, one of them is of a corn stalk, and one of them is of a flower which is indigenous only to North America. Well, they shouldn't have known about either one unless they'd been to North America, because there's no corn in Scotland, and this flower didn't exist in Scotland. So Rosslyn Chapel tends to support the idea that Henry Sinclair or someone might have been to America. Also, the Westford Knight, a historical site in Westford, Massachusetts, suggests that one of the knights that Sinclair brought with him, because of the nature of the burial site, those types of burials were only taking place in Scotland at that time in the late 1300s. So interesting evidence, and my friend has written a book called The Westford Knight. So I'm on these two different strands and researching for a long period of time now, these two strands, Sinclair Dee, what's going on? I've also had this idea of the goddess is coming back to the tower, and also a connection to contain Trump in some way, made a prophecy which will come true about that. That's another component of it. And then the most important component of it is that there's this all began with this story about King Arthur and Arthur's connection with John Dee, who Jim Egan, the head of the Newport Historical Museum, believes built the tower. So there's a connection between Arthur and the tower somehow, and that's what's weird for me. That's what's so fascinating. So this goes on for quite a while. It's now January of 2018, and the Arthur stuff keeps swirling around me, and I'm really challenged by it. And I keep all seeing 88 license plates to a ridiculous degree. It's alarming. I mean, every day I'm seeing many of them in bizarre synchronistic ways. I mean, I've never seen anything like this happen in terms of synchronicity. In all the years of my spiritual path, all the trips to Israel, ever, nothing like this. So I'm with a friend we're helping mutual friends move. And they're going to move some stuff. They're moving, so they're bringing some stuff to a consignment shop. This is a friend I've never spoken about Arthur with, but we're both connected in the spiritual things, and so I'm interested in that. We talk about a lot of things about Joshua and so on, but never mentioned Arthur. And so we go into this consignment shop because we're waiting for our friends to show up. It's on my son's birthday in January. And I look straight ahead as I walk in, and there, as if the bushes parted and you came across this glade and the light is hitting it, there straight ahead in the consignment shop, straight ahead, is this beautiful replica of a sword on a board, a Franklin Mint replica. It's very beautiful. And the Arthur stuff was so thick with me at the time, I'm like, is that Excalibur? So sure enough, this thing is a beautiful replication of Excalibur. It's like I'm discovering it. There are other swords they have in the stores, but that's not the one that's right front and center when I walk in. So I'm thinking, just to explore the idea here, I'm going, well, that's interesting. I'm finding it with my buddy here. I wonder if he has any connection with Arthur. So I say to him, you got any connection with Arthur? King Arthur? And he goes, oh my God. He said, of course, I mean, the day my son was born, we made sure to watch The Sword and the Stone again, the Disney Arthur movie. I'm like, what? Who says that? So a few days later, kind of the funds showed up for me to miraculously buy the sword because I didn't have it at the time. So I have our Excalibur now. Then at the end of March, this prophecy becomes fulfilled that Trump's going to start having trouble with women, which I'd predicted based on what had happened at the Tower in December. But then the final unfoldment starts occurring around this. It's cold one time, and that's the day, it's the only time in 57 years of listening to the New England forecasts that I've ever heard them reference the North Pole, because there's been air coming down from the North Pole. That's the same day that I'm reading about the historical idea that Arthur left Britain after his final battle, came to the New World, and even marked the North Pole. Now, what that means, I don't know, but the fact that I was reading about it the only day that, before the North Pole was mentioned in the news was interesting to me. But all these things, and I know that I'm being sent in all these different directions. There's the Guinevere piece, there's the Arthur piece, there's the Tower, there's the Sinclair piece, there's the D piece. I know all of them are direct guidance from Jeshua, but none of them fit together, and I have no idea what I'm doing, really. So one day I go over, and I'm told to go over and see Jim again, Jim Egan, to catch up on an idea. So I have some questions about the Newport Tower. And I go over, and the store's closed, and he says he's sick. So I figure, I'm not going to see him for a while. Have to be in Newport the next day. Actually, Joshua told me to go back the next day. I'm like, I've already been here, but I go back the next day, and I just decide I'll walk up towards the tower. And just then, Jim is coming out to give a lecture to somebody about the tower. I didn't think I'd see him, right? And all of the questions that I had for him were answered without me having to ask them. Then the bunch of us decide to go out to lunch. And I'm telling about, they're talking about the historical connection. When they ask me, well, why are you here? What's your interest in it? And I go, well, I channeled Jeshua and Jesus, and he's been talking to me about the tower for a while. And he says it's kind of an energetic beacon for the new world. So one of the guys at lunch with us, his eyes are getting wider and wider and going, this is so weird. Like, you're freaking me out. And I go, why? He goes, besides the fact it's an unusual story, he says, well, there's a woman in town who wrote a book about the Newport Tower called Newport Nights, Knights. And she says it's a portal. And I'm going, what? There's somebody who wrote a book about the tower saying it's a portal? So Jim, who's across the way, knows this woman, apparently. He says, oh, yeah, she it's pretty wild, Dave, but I got a copy of it back at the museum. I'll give it to you. I'm like, cool. So go back to the museum. He gives me the copy of the book, and I'm late for dinner, so I'm rushing back to the car. And he says, listen, it's pretty weird, but whatever. That's cool. I'll check it out. And I'm going back to the car and walking to the car in Newport, and I walk by a store, and outside the store is a armor, a medieval armor. And Joshua, I just feel this boom, like Joshua's like, yeah, put that on your radar. Put that on the map, man. Not now because you're late for dinner, but we want you to be aware of this store. And the name of the store is very unique. It's called Maison, like French, Maison DNA. Maison DNA. That's unusual. So I get back to the house and I start realizing, and no one had told me this, that this book, the Newport Nights book, the setting of it is Maison DNA. How's that for a coincidence? And I'm fascinated by that. So the next day, Joshua says to me, 10 a.m. or so, you have to go to Maison DNA right now. I'm like, no, it's Monday. I've been there 2 days in a row. I don't want to do that. No one's going to be there. It's going to be closed on Monday, probably. He says, you need to go right now. Okay, so I go over. Now, I'm trying to look for the person who wrote the book. I wonder if probably the people at the store know them. So I walk in, and I speak with Beth Loomis, who wrote the book. And and I didn't know that was the person who owned the store, is also the person who wrote the book. So the first person I meet is the person who wrote the book. Now, I also had this in my memory that I needed to reconnect at some point with the other goddess that had been at the tower, and this is from the last video, the one on the yellow bike. And I had no idea how I was ever going to do that. So 5 minutes after I'm at the store, she walks in the store. And she says, I've always meant, I thought she was there all the time. She says, I've always been meaning to come into this store, but I've never come into this store until now. So the owner of the store and the gal on the yellow bike and the partner of the owner of the store and myself sit down, and we have about a 2-hour conversation about Arthur, about many other things, in which Beth, the author, starts telling me and confirming for me a whole bunch of things about Arthur that my research had been showing me, but no one had ever confirmed, and she does it without me even asking the questions. So all these synchronicities are building. But I'm still not getting all the answers I need, because I don't understand what's Sinclair and Dee and Arthur and all these things, Jeshua, all these things around this. What does this have to do? What's up? Where's the glue? So I go home and I just say to Jeshua, I don't know what I'm supposed to be finding here. So my hand slips open in the book to the last page, the inside, the inside jacket cover. There's no typing on it, but there's a little Post-it note that Jim Egan had put there. And it says Merlin, page 63. So I go, oh, maybe I'm supposed to read page 63. So on page 63, and I checked with Beth Loomis the next day about this, and she said she didn't remember writing it, so it must have been channeled, which I think is true. She said, if Arthur had come to the New World, as John Dee believed, he would have come to the Newport Tower to open a Stargate portal. Now, I've already gotten in the portal opening storyline between Israel and Santa Fe. That's kind of how I'm seeing a lot of my spiritual work, as a mechanic. So when that happens, when she says that, all of the pieces of my puzzle go and are completely solid and completely whole and fit completely together. The idea that Arthur's a real guy. He's aware of the Atonement Plan and aware of the need for marking this land in the New World, because it would be part of the Atonement Plan in many, many years later. He comes to the site and opens a Stargate portal in whatever it was, 560 AD. Dies in America, most likely, and there's historical evidence for a blonde-haired king of that era, European, having been killed by Native Americans. I mean, this is my buddy who writes the books has information on this. There are other people who feel this is true too, so I'm fascinated by this, but it fits everything together in a way that is absolutely cohesive and ties everything together. So that's my story. Arthur came to open a portal, but I know something else is going on. And Sinclair, somebody marked it, and then Sinclair marks it with a building. Dee rebuilds the building later, and I'm asking Joshua, yes, that's the history of the tower. And it's been marked over and over and over again, because eventually it needs to be finally fully opened, because it wasn't fully opened at the time, because of the unfoldment of the divine union dynamics between Arthur and Guinevere didn't end so well. So Arthur, there has to be profound divine union for the portal to be opened properly, and it wasn't there. So now we're being called, and JM is bringing a group of 8 people to Rhode Island the next year, and I'm saying we need to go to the tower. So in September of 2018, the woman who I believe is connected with Guinevere, and my friend who I found the sword with, and our group of 8 all go to the tower. And I believe what happened at that time, and this is actually a tower built to Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene and Jeshua, with the right dynamics and geometries in place, the tower's finally opened. I see this jolt of light go through it. We're all around it in meditation. Jolt of light go through it, and kind of energy shooting out in all sides, and the tower's finally opened. And what I'm told that the 8s represent, the 3 8s, is they represent, because I think it was going to be hard for me to believe this, even in my storytelling mode, is that there was indeed a portal opened at the upper room in Israel in 2011. A major, massive opening at the sacred land near Abiquiu, Way of Mastery, Temple Canyon land in April of 2016. So they're open, but this is the center of the 8. The Newport Tower is the center of the infinity loop, representing the union of the 3 portals. It's the middle of them, and once it's activated, which I say it was, they're now self-sustaining. And heaven is, the frequencies of heaven are profoundly grounding themselves on earth and doing so in a way that needs no more maintenance, no more nothing. They're just going to keep at it. So this is my unusual and extraordinary story about the Newport Tower. And there's one more piece to it, and this leads to the next part of my journey. JM is capable of communicating on multiple spiritual realms. While he's at the tower, he goes into meditation and shares with me later what he saw. He said, well, first of all, it was surprising. Now that, you may never hear that from JM again, because he's not surprised very often. He says, but I'm there, and I hadn't really given much attention to Arthur. And I know you're telling me about Arthur and so on, but, and Arthur appeared to me in my meditations. He said, first of all, the tower there's something energetically going on in the tower. And it has a direct link to the tour in Glastonbury and to Jeshua's cave at Qumran, which is a place we visit where the Dead Sea Scrolls were written and where we believe Jeshua meditated when he spent time in Qumran. These are really sacred places, the tour in Glastonbury and the cave at Qumran. There's a direct linkage between the Newport Tower and those two places. That's interesting. And then he said, so Arthur appears to me, and then he kind of nods over to his side to his teacher. He says, this is my teacher. And Elijah, the prophet of the Old Testament and an essential part of the Atonement Plan, he is there at the Mount of Transfiguration when Joshua transfigures into his light body for the first time. And we're told that Elijah is Jeshua's teacher, the great teacher of how to use light, how to manifest and move light and manipulate light. So Elijah's a major dude. Now, it also makes sense to me that if Elijah was his teacher, that Merlin was an incarnation of Elijah. So that's a theory I have. Then he said, Guinevere appeared to me. And Guinevere nodded over and said, this is my teacher, and Mary Magdalene appeared. Now, I'd always known that Mary Magdalene was Guinevere's teacher. So all of these things profoundly confirming the importance of the Newport Tower site. And then as the brief pilgrimage ends, the small gathering that we had, just of the 8, which made sense because of the dynamics of the 8. The tower has 8 legs. There's a lot connected to the 8s, the crazy 8s going on. And there's so much more to the story I haven't told, so many more synchronicities. But this directly links to everything that happens next. And what happens next is the most important part of the entire Atonement Plan. It happens first in England and then in Israel. And so I say to JM, well, geez, he says it's the tower's linked to the tour in England and the cave in Israel. Too bad we don't have any trips planned to either of those places. And I'm being sarcastic because the next 2 trips have already been planned, the first to England and the second to Israel. England in October of 2018 and Israel in, I think it was April of 2019. And the story goes there next. Thanks for listening.